A militia that owns not a single warship is about to decide which ships are allowed to cross one of the busiest waterways on Earth, and it is already doing it for free while it finalizes a plan to charge everyone who is not Chinese. The waterway is the Bab el-Mandeb, between Yemen and Djibouti, where the Red Sea narrows to under 30 kilometers. Every ship moving from Asia to Europe through the Suez Canal crosses this gap, and right now a group with no navy and no warships decides who gets through. On July 20th, they blockaded Saudi ports, and traffic did not slow down. It collapsed. On July 26th, only 11 cargo ships crossed the strait in a single day, the lowest count recorded in months, on a route that normally moves roughly 12% of the world's seaborne oil. They are now finalizing a system to charge for that crossing, copying Iran's exact playbook from the Strait of Hormuz. And the plan reportedly exempts one country completely: China. Here is how the system already works. A shipping company emails an address run by the Humanitarian Operations Coordination Center, and within hours, someone on the other end decides if that ship is safe to pass. The group calls it the Safe Transit Service. Publicly, the group insists the service is free, and it has denied any plan to charge for passage at all. But regional officials briefed on the plan told Reuters that Houthi representatives traveled to Tehran in July and discussed turning that same inbox into a paid toll with Iranian officials. No timeline has been set. The denial and the Tehran meeting are both on the record, and they do not agree with each other. This is a group that governs roughly 80% of Yemen's population without a navy or an air force of its own, and still without a seat at the United Nations or formal diplomatic recognition from most of the world. It has spent over a decade fighting a civil war on land, financed largely by Iran, and it still found the resources to build a missile and drone program precise enough to threaten commercial shipping hundreds of kilometers offshore. It cannot sink a fleet. It does not need to. A handful of missile and drone strikes, backed by one email address, are already doing the job a navy would normally do. Shipping lines facing that inbox have exactly two options, and both cost money. Cross the strait and accept whatever risk premium or eventual toll the Houthis attach to the crossing, or divert around the Cape of Good Hope at the southern tip of Africa, the same route ships used before the Suez Canal existed at all. That detour adds roughly 6,000 extra nautical miles on an Asia to Europe run and stretches a voyage out by 10 to 14 additional days, depending on the ship and the weather. Neither option is theoretical. Shipping lines have already run both playbooks in real conditions during the earlier Houthi campaign, so the cost of each path is not a guess going into this toll decision. It is a number every carrier's finance department already has on file. Every extra day burns fuel and pushes the arrival date on everything in the containers further out. A single large container ship can burn well over 100 tons of fuel a day at sea, so 2 extra weeks around Africa is not a rounding error on a shipping line's budget. It is a cost that gets passed straight down the chain, first to the freight rate, then to the retailer, then to the price on the shelf. There is no free option left on the table. Either the Houthis get paid directly, or the shipping line pays anyway, just to someone else, in fuel and time. This is not a blockade in the way most people picture one, with warships boarding vessels. It is a protection system built on a chokepoint that carries 12% of the world's oil, enforced with a fraction of a real navy's budget, using the exact tool an insurance company uses: fear, repriced into a fee. Think about what that fee actually rests on. Not a fleet, just enough missiles and drones fired at a handful of tankers to make every insurer on Earth reprice the risk. The last time Houthi attacks hit this route hard, insurance premiums for transiting ships jumped by roughly 20%, and shipping costs on affected routes rose by as much as 60%, because insurers do not wait to see if the next missile actually hits a ship. The moment attacks resume, the Lloyd's-linked Joint War Committee in London can list the strait as a high-risk zone, and every owner sailing through it starts paying an extra premium quoted as a percentage of the ship's total value, not a flat fee. On a large tanker, that percentage alone can run into hundreds of thousands of dollars for a single crossing. Every owner on the planet pays that markup whether or not their vessel is ever targeted. The Suez Canal Authority already knows what this does to a route, because it lived through an earlier version of the same pressure. During the first extended wave of Houthi attacks, canal revenue collapsed by more than 60% as major carriers suspended Red Sea transits entirely and rerouted around Africa. Egypt has been trying to win that traffic back ever since, and every fresh threat from the strait resets the clock. Carriers like Maersk and MSC are watching this new toll plan the same way they watched the last crisis, deciding in real time whether resuming normal transits is worth the risk or whether the safer bet is simply to keep sailing the long way around. None of this stays contained to a shipping ledger. When a carrier reroutes around Africa instead of paying to cross the strait, the goods on that ship arrive later everywhere at once, not just at one port. A clothing order that used to take 3 weeks from a factory in Asia to a warehouse in Europe stretches closer to a month. A shipment of electronics headed for holiday shelves gets booked earlier and priced higher to cover the extra fuel. None of it says Houthi toll on the invoice, and no customs form anywhere will ever mention the Bab el-Mandeb by name. It just shows up as a longer wait and a higher number, and almost nobody buying the product ever traces it back to an email inbox in Yemen. Freight forwarders have already started quoting longer lead times on Asia to Europe bookings as a standard line item, the same way they quietly built in extra weeks during the last wave of attacks, without ever needing to explain why on the invoice. Iran is already running this exact model on the other side of the peninsula in the Strait of Hormuz, where oil exports have been disrupted for months. With Hormuz already choked off, Saudi Arabia has leaned harder on the Red Sea route to keep its own oil exports moving. That is the exact route the Houthis chose to blockade first, and the exact route now facing a toll modeled on Iran's own tactics. Yemen's foreign minister-designate said publicly this week that the Houthis are seeking to copy the Iranian model. That is not analyst speculation. That is the other side's own government confirming the playbook, on the record. And this would not be the first time a favored flag sailed through untouched. Ships flagged or linked to Chinese owners have moved through Houthi-controlled waters with unusual safety since the group's campaign began in 2023, a pattern shipping analysts have noted since well before this toll plan surfaced. If the exemption becomes official, China's merchant fleet keeps moving at normal cost while American and allied shipping absorbs a toll that Beijing never has to pay, turning a militia's choke point into a quiet trade advantage for one government over its rivals. China is already the single largest builder of the ships and containers moving through this exact corridor, so a formal exemption does not just protect a handful of tankers. It protects the supply chain. China already dominates on both ends, while raising the cost for every competitor trying to move goods through the same water. If the toll goes live, the same axis controls the entrance and the exit of the Red Sea corridor that Europe and Asia depend on, without either government needing to sink a single ship to prove it can. This is not unprecedented either. Somali pirates held this same stretch of ocean hostage for years, using little more than skiffs and rifles, forcing every major shipping line to pay for armed guards or naval escorts long after anyone expected the problem to end. The Houthis have missile and drone stockpiles, and a state sponsor in Tehran. A US-led naval coalition has been running near-continuous operations in the region for over a year, specifically to counter these attacks, and the attacks have continued anyway. Washington's options against an inbox are thinner than they look. You cannot sanction an email address the way you sanction a bank. You cannot negotiate a ceasefire with a toll plan that its own operators publicly deny exists. Warships can escort convoys and shoot down individual missiles, and the coalition patrolling these waters has done exactly that, repeatedly. But a warship cannot stop a spreadsheet decision made in an insurance office in London, where every rise in risk gets converted into a premium the moment attacks resume, whether or not the Houthis ever collect a formal toll at all. This is the part that should worry anyone who assumed a militia without a navy has no real leverage over global trade. It does not need to physically hold the strait the way a state would. It needs 11 ships to notice they slowed to almost nothing in a single day, and every insurer and every shipping line does the rest of the work for it. Repricing risk and paying whatever an inbox eventually decides is required to sail through safely. So somewhere between Yemen and Djibouti, an email address run by a group with 0 warships is quietly becoming one of the most powerful choke points in global trade. Nobody voted on this. No treaty created it. It exists because enough missiles hit enough ships that insurers stopped waiting to find out if the next one would too. The toll it eventually settles on will not show up as a headline in most people's feed. It will show up as a few extra dollars on your next tank of gas and a few extra days waiting on a delivery that crossed that strait long before anyone in Washington or Riyadh agrees on how to stop it.